Hello folks, my name is Jeff Pelly and welcome back to the next installment of our IEP Best Practice Series. This month we're going to focus on state and local assessments and I'm very happy to see you here. Thanks so much for joining us. So as we move the presentation forward, I just want to let you all know if you've missed any of our previous sessions, we can access those by the links here. Our first session was on present levels, then we worked on measurable annual goals. Transition was next, and last month was on alignment. If you've missed any of these, please pause the video and check out the links here. They're all archived on YouTube, and we would be happy to have you check those out. So today, our objectives are to really dive into our state and local assessments. We want to find out what assessments are given at what grade levels, and that includes the PSSA, the Keystone exams, the PASA, and the Access for English learners. We're also going to go over what checkboxes you need to be checking, the accommodations, and then of course, local assessments. Before we do that though, we want to do a quick review of what we reviewed earlier in our IEP Best Practice Series. So first and foremost, Individualized Education Program. Remember that that's a legally binding written document that outlines the specially designed instruction to make sure that that individual who has a special need is going to make progress within 1 year's time. We like to say that it's a contract between the school district and the parents, and we also note that it's required to be reviewed annually, but it can be reviewed and revised at any time if the parents request or the school district. These are the IEP sections. It starts with dates and demographics. Section 1 is special considerations. Section 2, present levels. Section 3, transition. Section 4, participation in assessments, what we're going to review today. Section 5, goals and objectives. Section 6, special education, related services, supplementary aids and services, and of course, modifications. Section 7 is the educational placement of the child, and Section 8 is Penn data reporting. So when we talk about our present levels, the biggest thing here is that we want to make sure that we paint a picture that summarizes and describes the student's current academic performance, functional performance, transition skills as well. These present levels are going to do two things. They're going to identify needs and they're going to identify strengths. Those needs are then going to be turned into measurable annual goals. These are the skills that were identified in the needs section. We prioritize these, usually 3 to 5 goals for most students, and we again want to forecast where we think that student would be in 1 year's time. We always want to make sure that we start with the baseline, and we always want to make sure that these goals are observable and measurable. We're also going to talk about transition in our review, and that makes sure that we focus on 3 areas of transition: education and training, employment, and independent living. We always need to start with the student's preference and interests, and we also want to make sure that we focus on assessments with the student's transition section there. Another big point with transition is making sure that agencies that are likely to provide and pay for services are invited. Those agencies need to be part of the IEP process. It's okay if they don't show up to an IEP meeting, but we at least need to make sure that we are inviting them. We also take it a step further in our review with the transition grid. That has the same 3 questions there: education and training, employment, and independent living. We also list our courses of study. We also have services, which are our measurable annual goals in an action statement, and also activities. Those are things that we always need to have represented in the transition grid. And then last but not least, we're going to review alignment, and that's basically making sure that we have a common thread that's through the entire IEP, starting with our present levels, which leads to a baseline, which demonstrates a need, which is met by a goal, and then we have progress monitoring on the goal, and that progress monitoring leads to next year's present levels, and that cycle keeps repeating. Another way to look at this is making sure that we have our present levels with baseline information. Those represent our needs, the needs that have to be addressed in the IEP. Those needs typically are addressed through measurable annual goals, and then we conduct progress monitoring, and then next year that progress monitoring goes back into the present level, seeing that cycle and how it repeats. Thanks for hanging with us while we do that review. And now we want to make sure that we just remind everybody that we always have to make sure our IEP is individualized. They're not all going to look the same. They shouldn't look the same. They should be individualized. And that leads us to our best practices for this month's focus, which is state and local assessments. So when we talk about grade level assessments, the first one we're going to talk about is the PSSA. It stands for the Pennsylvania System School Assessment, and it's a standards-based criterion reference assessment which provides students, parents, and educators with an understanding of the student and the school performance. These standards are typically English language arts, mathematics, science, technology, and it identifies what a student should know and be able to do at varying grade levels. When we talk about the PSSA, the math and English language arts assessments are given in grades 3 through 8, and we also test science in grades 4 and 8. The Keystone exams are an end of the course assessments designed to assess proficiency in the following areas: algebra, literature, and biology. They are just one component of Pennsylvania's statewide high school graduation requirement. The Keystone exams are given at the conclusion of the student taking the following courses: Algebra 1, Literature, and Biology. The PASA is the Pennsylvania Alternate System of Assessment, and it was developed in accordance with IDEA to meet the needs of students that have the most significant cognitive disabilities who are not able to participate in the general assessment, even with accommodations in place. The PASA is administered in grades 3 through 8, 3 through 8, and 11. And when we talk about science, those are going to be in grades 4, 8, and 11. So math, English, language arts, 3 through 8, also 11. Science, grade 4, 8, and 11. And that's all for the PASA. When we consider the PASA, we have to make sure that the student is eligible for the PASA. There are 6 guiding questions that the team must answer yes on. Those questions are: will the student be in grade 3, 5, 6, 7, 8, or 11 by September 1st of the school year in which the IEP will be operative? We have to have a yes for that one. Number 2, does the student have a significant cognitive disability? Again, has to be a yes. Number 3, does the student require intensive, direct, and repeated instruction in order to learn and generalize academic, functional, and adaptive behavior skills across settings? That has to be a yes as well. Question number 4, does the student require extensive adaptation and support in order to perform and participate meaningfully and productively in the everyday life activities integrated for school, home, community, and work environments? We need that to be a yes. Number 5, does the student require substantial modifications to the general education curriculum? Also needs to be a yes. And the last question that we want a yes on: does the student's participation in general curriculum differ substantially in form and or substance from that of most other students? So for that PASA, the team has to consider all 6 questions. All 6 questions have to be a yes. If the team determines that the student is eligible, then there needs to be an explanation as to why the student cannot participate in the traditional state assessment. And we're going to go over where all of these statements go in a few moments. And we also have a supporting document, which is a decision-making companion tool in our supportive documents that I'll go over in a little bit, that can help you make those determinations for PASA eligibility. That takes us to the Access for English Learners, and it stands for Accessing Communication and Comprehension in English State to State Access, ACCESS, and it's designed to measure English language learners' proficiency in English. It assesses social and instructional English as well as language associated with language arts, mathematics, science, and social studies within the school context across the 4 language domains of listening, speaking, reading, and writing. So this is only going to be for a very small percentage of special needs students who are also English learners. The Access is taken in grades K through 12, every single grade, and again, it focuses on listening, reading, writing, and speaking. So those are the assessments that we're going to talk about, the grade levels when those assessments happen. And now we're going to talk about the actual action that you have to take as a special educator when you're filling out the state and local assessment form. So under state and local assessments, you'll see 2 checkboxes. One begins with no statewide assessment is administered, and the second one starts with no English proficiency assessment is administered because the student is not an English learner. So what those questions look like on the state's IEP is the following one here. No statewide assessment is administered. No English proficiency is administered because the student is not an English learner. If your student is not an English learner, it's going to be checked this box here every single year, okay? If the student is in a grade where there's no assessment, you're also going to be checking that one there. So if your student is not an English learner, every single year we're going to check this box. And if there is no statewide assessment, then you're going to check that box there. So when we talk about accommodations, we have to consider this every single year. The IEP team every single year needs to discuss each year about those allowable accommodations that may be needed by the state, by the student taking the state assessment. So the accommodations considered must be already utilized by that student during their daily instruction. It can't just be in place for the state assessments. They have to be using these accommodations each and every day. And the bullet point here says a student who does not need accommodations at any other time should not have accommodations only for the state assessments. So again, we want to stress that that student should be using the accommodations you're going to list for the state assessment each and every day throughout their coursework. So we also have a supporting documentation for more information on how you can determine those accommodation guidelines. And I'm also going to refer you to your school district special education director for the language that sometimes you'll use for those accommodations there. Now we're going to talk about our local assessments here. And the same considerations about the grade level assessments and the accommodations are going to be made for any local assessment that the student might take. The students might be also eligible for a local alternative assessment. And I work for the intermediate unit number 17, and our students use the competent learner model, CLM, for our autistic support classrooms. And there is an assessment that the students take with the competent learner model. So sometimes I use that as an example for what an alternative local assessment might be, because all of our students in those autistic support classrooms take that CLM assessment. So when we put this all together, what does it look like? In terms of this snapshot here from the IEP, we spoke about those check boxes there, but this gives us an information for the PSSA. If the student is going to take math, science, and ELA without accommodations, those are just check boxes there. If they're going to have accommodations, you're going to check these boxes here and then list those accommodations to be provided. Again, taking into consideration that the student should have those accommodations across their daily setting. Next up is what it looks like for the Keystone, Algebra 1, Literature and Biology. Remember, if they're going to do it without accommodations, we're going to check that box. With accommodations, we check this box, and then we list the accommodations that are going to be provided. Next up is the PASA. Remember, we talked about those 6 guiding questions as to whether or not the student will be eligible for the PASA. And then we're going to list some statements here. Explain why the student cannot participate in the PSSA or Keystone exams. Even with accommodations, you're going to list your rationale there. And then you're going to explain why the PASA is more appropriate after you consider those 6 criteria. And then the student still may need some additional accommodations if they're taking the PASA. And that could be assistive technology, signing, any kind of output if they're going to be answered questions, those type of things there. So that's our PASA assessment example. And then we're going to look at for our access for English learners. And we talk about listening, reading, writing, and speaking. Again, we have some questions about accommodations, your check boxes there, if they're unable to participate, and then the accommodation piece here as well. And the last section here, we're going to talk about our local assessments. We're going to check a box here if the local assessment is not administered on that student's grade level, or if the student will participate without accommodations, if the student will participate in that local assessments with accommodations, and then we list the accommodations here. And if the student's going to take an alternative local assessment, we're going to check this box here, list the rationale as to why they cannot participate in the traditional local assessment, and explain why the alternate assessment is more appropriate. So when we wrap things up here, we want to make sure that you visit this link here if you would like to download a copy of today's PowerPoint. We're also going to talk about 2 documents here, the PASA Eligibility Criteria Decision-Making Companion Tool and guidelines for selection and use of accommodations for the Keystone exams and the PSSA tests. But before I pause the presentation here, we want to make sure you get that URL to download the information. And I just want to make sure that we always talk about ensuring the proper boxes are checked based on that student's grade. We consider the PASA eligibility there. And we also review potential accommodations each year because those might change from year to year for the student who's going to take that assessment, okay? I always like to list my email address and my contact information. But before we end today, I'm going to stop our share on the actual presentation. And I would like to just share those 2 supporting documents that I talked to you about. So this one here is going to be the PASA eligibility criteria. It walks you through those 6 questions that you're going to ask as an IEP team. So that is available for you to download. We're going to stop our share on that one and then share the accommodations piece. And this is just the accommodations guidelines here that the state of Pennsylvania has put forth. It's a PowerPoint with many slides here that you're going to be able to download. So we want to stress that the team can go ahead and download that one if you think it's going to be helpful. And I just want to thank you all for your time today. It's been a pleasure presenting this piece on state and local assessments to you. And I can't wait to see you back next month, when we talk more about IEP best practices. Thank you so much and have a great afternoon.